lab, we'll be discussing the anatomy of the eye. We can divide the eye into three layers, or also known as tunics. There's an outer fibrous tunic, a middle vascular tunic, and an inner neural tunic. The neural tunic you may know as the retina. Tunic just means layer. Let's take a look at the outer tunic first, the fibrous tunic. The fibrous tunic is what forms the white of the eye. If you take a look at the picture here from our book, all of this up over here is the sclera, which is the white of the eye. This is a tough tissue. If you ever get a chance to do dissection, the sclera is actually difficult to cut through with a scalpel. It's so tough, but that's important because it helps to support the eyeball, keeps it shape, keeps it from collapsing. The other part of the fibrous tunic is this kind of curved bubble right over here. This is the cornea. The cornea is a transparent tissue. This allows light to enter the eye. And so the two parts of the fibrous tunic are the sclera, which would be the white of the eye, and the cornea, which is the transparent bubble in the front. I grabbed a model from the lab just to show anything here that's white, all of this white would be the sclera. Then if you take a look to the anterior, this bubble right over here, we could actually follow it here. It was cut. That would be the cornea. Just deep to the fibrous tunic is the vascular tunic. The vascular tunic is a thinner tissue. It's very, very vascular, as the name implies, so it's going to have a lot of blood vessels. If you ever do get a chance to see it also on dissection, you'll see it's actually a dark membrane. That's because it has a lot of melanocytes, which produce the pigment melanin. And that's important to help keeping the light rays in the eye, not that they get reflected out or bounced around. So you'll see it's kind of a dark vascular type of tissue. Just anterior to the choroid, we have the iris, which is the colored part of the eye, and that surrounds the opening that goes into the eye, known as the pupil. The iris will actually change its size to adjust the light going into the pupil. The other structure that's just anterior to the choroid is called the ciliary body. This is nothing more than smooth muscle that's attached to a lens by these little ligaments called the suspensory ligaments. So all day long, as we're looking at objects up close and far away, our lens needs to change its shape so that we can focus in on those objects. So the ciliary body is going to be adjusting the diameter of the lens. So going back to our photograph over here, so before this was the fibrous tunic, this was the sclera. Just underneath it, you can see all the blood vessels in this layer here. This is the vascular tunic, and this would be specifically the choroid. Now, just anterior to the choroid, right, in this picture here, it's kind of brownish, but this brownish tissue right here, this is going to be the iris, and the opening in the middle of the iris is the pupil. And then you can see right behind the pupil is the lens. Now, the lens is attached to this little muscle down over here called the ciliary body. Like I said, that's nothing more than a smooth muscle, and it's connected to the lens by these little strings right here called the suspensory ligaments. Okay, so the choroid, iris, pupil, ciliary body are connected to the lens by the suspensory ligaments. And again, the lens needs to change shape. That's why it's connected to that muscle. So in our model from lab, we can see here, again, the white of the eye was the sclera. So just deep to it, this middle layer right here, you can see the blood vessels drawn in. This is going to be the choroid. Just anterior to the choroid, we have the iris. On this model, it's a little bit gray, but this whole circular area here is the iris. The opening right here is the pupil, and we can see the lens right behind the pupil. This red structure here is the ciliary body, and you can see the suspensory ligaments going over, these little white strings going over to the lens. So as this muscle contracts, it changes the shape of the lens, and we're able to focus in on objects both near and far. Same layer. This is just an anterior view. Again, we can see the iris a little bit better this time. So all of this is the iris. And we have the pupil, the lens behind the pupil, and the choroid. Over here again is that ciliary body. The innermost lining is the neural tunic. Again, as I said, you probably know it better as the retina. This contains the neurons and the different photoreceptors that allow us to see. Photoreceptors are the rods and the cones. In the back of the retina, there's an area which has a high concentration of cone cells, just a higher concentration of cone cells. It's known as the macula lutea. Within the macula lutea, there's a central area that has just cone cells, and it allows us to have the sharpest vision or the keenest vision. That area is known as the fovea centralis. We're not going to see it on our model that I'm showing today. I did put it in on a diagram. If you were to look in the back of the eye with the ophthalmoscope, you would see the whole retina in the back. And then you can see this little dark area right over here. This is the macula lutea, and then one little spot within there is known as the fovea centralis. And this is, again, the place where we have the most cones and we have the sharpest vision. If you ever watch somebody trying to focus in on something, sometimes you see them shifting their head unconsciously. They're actually trying to direct the light so that it hits the macula lutea and the fovea centralis so that they have the best vision. While I have this picture up, this little yellow area right here is where the optic nerve is entering the retina. It has no rods or cones. So theoretically, if light hits it, you're not going to, if you were just looking at light hitting there, you would have a blind spot. You wouldn't be able to see because there are no rods and cones. So we call this area the optic disc. Right, and like I said before, the optic disc represents the location of the optic nerve. It's in the back of the eye because that's where the optic nerve enters the back of the eye. We sometimes say it is a blind spot because it has no rods or cones. If we go back to our model from the lab, again, we can see, again, the white of the eye being the sclera, the vascular tunic, we can see nicely over here, the vascular choroid. Now, deep to that, this would be the retina. Right, this lies right up against the choroid. Back over here, this is optic nerve or cranial nerve number 2. Right, so this is going to enter the back of each eye. And right here, I kind of just put an arrow showing where the optic disc would be. Again, on this model, we can't take it apart to see it, but it would be in the back of the eye over there. All right, so those are our 3 tunics: the fibrous tunic, the vascular tunic, and the neural tunic. The last part of the eye I'd like to cover with you is that the eye has some cavities within it that contain fluid. So this is a transverse section through the eye where we're looking at it from above down. This is the lens, just to give us some bearings. Here's the ciliary body, and you can see the suspensory ligaments. So in kind of purple here, everything in the front, this is known as the anterior cavity. Then we can divide it into 2 parts. The anterior chamber is in front of the iris, and this cavity or this chamber right here behind the iris but in front of the lens is the posterior chamber. This fluid is very watery. It's more of a watery type of fluid. Behind the lens, kind of in pink here, this is the posterior cavity. Now, this is not filled up with water. It's more of a gelatinous substance that we call the vitreous humor. What's important about that is that vitreous humor keeps the retina up against the wall of the eye, keeps it up against the choroid. If that vitreous humor in there kind of dried up or we lost a little bit of it, the retina could slide down and actually detach from the remaining part of the eyeball. So those are the fluid cavities. Again, the anterior cavities, everything in purple, has an anterior chamber and a posterior chamber. And then the posterior cavity is going to be the cavity with the vitreous humor. That's the end of this recording, and the next recording will be the anatomy of hearing.